From around May of 2022 to around September of 2022, I went on a mission to visit as many botanical gardens as I possibly could. My journey took me from my home in California through the desert southwest to the humid southeast, and then back through the middle of the country, then turned northward to check out the Pacific Northwest. In total, I visited about 52 botanical gardens in about 150 days. Some were big botanical gardens, really well maintained. Others were small, little hidden gems. Others were in major states of disrepair, but I got to see the whole spectrum and I got to discover a lot of cool, interesting gardens and see a lot of things that I had never seen before. So you may be wondering, how the hell did you afford that? Because horticulture is not well known for its high pay. I lived in my Prius while I was traveling, and for the most part, I would camp in parking lots or public lands. There's the bean right there. Occasionally, I would splurge on a campsite, but I traveled as cheaply as possible by sleeping in my Prius. I have one video up about my Prius setup, and I'm planning to make a couple more, so if that interests you, please go ahead and check those out once I make them. Obviously, I haven't made them yet, but I will. The goal of my trip was to see the botanical gardens of America, and from that exploration to learn more about horticulture in America in general. What do we grow here? What designs do we like to do? What is the state of our botanical gardens generally? Because I think they're a really important resource. And so I was curious to see what's going on with botanical gardens in this country. The other thing that was really cool to see was the climates of all the places that I went. For me, growing up in California, I didn't know what the southeast was going to be like in terms of heat and humidity in the summer. So hot. Thought it would be totally fine to sleep in my car. Luckily, the Prius has climate control, but I learned what it really means for summer to be hot and humid. Visiting botanical gardens may sound pretty glorious, but it's sweaty. It's so hot. So hot. It was really cool to see what sort of plants can grow in that, because to me it seemed very intense as a human. It was a lot. Another goal of my trip was to photograph the plants in the gardens that I saw. I'm here at the LA Arboretum getting some plant photos. And this was partially for my own interest. I love photographing plants, but it is also for my work as a database manager for a horticultural database. While traveling, I also worked around 20 hours a week from the road, processing the photos as well as doing the normal database management tasks that I typically do. Processing some photos. So I learned a lot about horticulture from this trip, and particularly what grows where. It was really, really cool to see plants in the desert southwest, cactus, succulents, and then also to see what grows in the southeast. There's some things that grow just as well in California and the humid southeast, which is a cool thing to see. And then I really, really loved the lushness of both the high elevation mountain gardens and the Pacific Northwest. The mountain gardens such as like Denver and Utah, those gardens were particularly cool because when you have a cold winter and a lot of your plants go fully dormant during the winter time, during the summer all of that plant material is from this year's growth, and it just provides this really lush feeling that isn't present a lot of the times in coastal California gardens, because those things are evergreen and they don't get rejuvenated by that seasonal change. That's a thing that I like as well, because in part it's different than where I live. I also got to see the diversity in the types of gardens that exist. There are so many things that you can consider a botanical garden. I'm a huge fan of formal gardens, estate gardens. I love cottagecore, but I also really love to see that there was a strong focus in many of these botanical gardens on the native species of the region that the botanical garden was in, or gardens like the rhododendron species botanical garden near Seattle was so cool to see a bunch of different species of this genus gathered in one place. Yeah, so there's a lot of different types of gardens, and it's really cool to see the diversity of gardens that exists. I think that it's very easy to claim that botanical gardens are superfluous, but I think they serve the important function of reminding us to engage with nature and the joy that that brings. It reminds us why it's so important that we care about the world and the plants that sustain us. I think gardening and botanical gardens offer us one of the most direct connections to the earth and to the world outside of ourselves. Botanical gardens are also often the keepers of really important information. Botanical gardens are kind of like a library of cultivated plants. I'm at the Huntsville Botanical Garden Daylily Collection. Check it out. Here's Stella d'Oro. And then here's a bunch of other varieties, all, as you can see, way bigger than our little itty bitty friend. They're a place where you can go, find a plant, and more often than not, it will have a name directly there with the plant. The reason this is important is because without that name attached directly to a plant, it makes it really hard for us to find information about that plant elsewhere or to communicate information about that plant to another person without them seeing the plant directly. So having names attached to plants is really, really helpful, and it also allows people to learn a plant very easily, which can't be done if there's no name attached to the plant. Tulsa Botanical Garden. One of my favorite things about this garden is that they planted all of these southern magnolias, and they're all different cultivars, and I love that they planted them in this row because then you can actually compare the different cultivars, where if you saw them planted alone or all one cultivar, you couldn't actually really tell the difference between them. But because they're all here, you can. And that goes for super advanced gardeners. It also goes for beginning gardeners that are interested in trying that plant out in their garden. In that way, botanical gardens are super important for people that want to learn more about plants but don't have any other resources to do that. Many gardens house collections of plants that are used by scientists, gardeners, seeking genetics, seeking information, seeking cuttings, or seeking just inspiration. What do you want to grow in your garden? What works in your local climate? Those things are super important to know and are best known by seeing the plant actually growing in your local climate. Some gardens even have collections of plants that are threatened in the wild, such as the Huntington Botanical Garden that's in Southern California. Southern California, it's that way. These collections usually include exact information about where the plant was collected, and this is called provenance data. This is important because in the case that this species goes extinct, we'll know exactly where the genetics came from for that particular plant, and we can know how best to reinstall it in the wild if that's what we want to do. The other thing that's really cool about this is that it allows people to see in person the species that are threatened. And when you see something, when you learn its name, I think you get a better understanding of why it's important and you start to care about its conservation. The other way that this is cool is that We keep threatened species alive through horticulture and cultivation. If you introduce a cool succulent and people are really excited to grow it, that's actually protecting the species by having people growing it in horticulture, in their yard, in cultivation. The fancy term that's used for this thing that we're talking about, which is protecting species in cultivation, is called ex situ conservation, which is in contrast with in situ conservation, which is where you're protecting plants in their native habitat. I'm not sure if it was the pandemic or exactly why, but I was really saddened to see that a lot of gardens that I visited were in a state of major or minor disrepair. I would encourage anybody that is able and stoked to support your local botanical garden, volunteer, maybe become a member. It seems like these valuable public resources are really struggling right now. I found that pretty sad to see because I find them really important and really inspiring. Even if you're not crazy about plants like me, botanical gardens are really fun to visit when you're traveling to new places. They are sure to delight and inspire you. That's it for this video, but I will be making more videos about the Prius and then also about my horticulture adventures, past, present, and future. And I'm really excited to take you all along on the ride and just like nerd out about plants. So please join me if that interests you, and I will see you in the next video. From May to September, I visited 50 botanical gardens a day. 50 botanical gardens a day. That's possible. And cut.